I met Gary Dell'Abate in 1988 when my old improv partner Bob Nelson was opening for Rodney Dangerfield on Broadway. I was with Bob's manager, who was also an old friend of mine. I spotted Gary across the aisle. I knew exactly who he was. Howard Stern and I had each made our film debut in Bob Nelson's independent feature in 1983. I was a fan. Gary knew my date and approached us at intermission. I smiled shyly, sort of like this. The next day I tracked him down at the station and we began a friendship that spanned a few years and a date or three. I took Gary to rock clubs and he cooked me spaghetti. I got him a coveted interview with Cher's media-shy bagel boy, and I got a plug on Howard Stern that brought 800 people to my new club opening night. And from that, we both landed on page 6, which is on the table. Gary worked on the Howard Stern show. He's worked on there since 1984, originally on WNBC, for those who didn't saw it, yeah. Then syndicated through K-Rock and through Sirius XM Radio. When I knew him, his nickname was Boy Gary. He became Baba Booey about 20 years ago, and we'll let Gary tell you that story. Although he's often the brunt of jokes around the station, he's the reason why that show runs smoothly, and anybody around there will tell you that, I'm sure. In addition to being Howard's producer, Gary also co-hosts broadcasts on Sirius, the wrap-up show, which follows each day's show, and the Friday show, which features recent clips mixed with some that date back to the WNBC days, WNBC, in the early 1980s. Howard has pointed out that Gary's ability to recall details of events that happened decades ago adds a great deal of insight to that show and causes me some embarrassment trying to figure out what he remembers from those dates. But anyway, he won't tell us that. Gary is also known for his knowledge of music and at times participates in Stump the Booey, a game where listeners compete with Gary to identify the titles and artists of songs based on short clips. Gary's talent has taken his music knowledge to TV, winning VH1's Rock and Roll Jeopardy, I saw you on that, and has appeared on Hollywood Squares 5 times. More important than any of that, he's a good guy, hence saving my ass today and being here to entertain you. He's a devoted husband and father. His current New York Times best-selling memoir hit #6 and is entitled They Call Me Baba Booey. Please welcome my hero.
Thank you, Vicki, for that wonderful introduction. This book is not nearly as cerebral as Tennessee was. So I did enjoy that. So what Vicki told you, I've been the producer of the Howard Stern Show for 27 years. And I've been offered many times to write a book. I've been approached over the years, and people wanted me to write a book about the show. What's it like when this person comes in? You know, is Paul McCartney really a nice guy? And that really wasn't the kind of book that I wanted to write. So I had turned down all those offers, and then I got an offer to write a book again, and I was actually out pitching a book about music. One of the ones you didn't mention was I actually was on Don't Forget the Lyrics.
I saw that.
Where I won $200,000, not for me. I won it for a charity called Lifebeat, which is an AIDS charity, and I'll talk about that a little bit because I had a brother who died of AIDS, and there's a chapter about that in the book. And so I was out pitching this book about music, and I found a book agent who was a friend of mine, and we sat down one day, and he said, well, you know, you probably could sell that book, but I don't know if people are really going to be interested in it. He said to me, what's your story? And I said, well, what do you mean, what's your story? He goes, well, what's your story? And I said, I don't have a story. And he goes, everybody's got a story. And here's the crazy thing. I knew exactly what he meant when he said that. And so I got up the next day and I said, you want to hear my story? This is my story. He goes, that's great. And I said, yeah, here's the problem. I don't really know that I want to tell that story. So, because it involved my family. It involved a lot of different people. So I went home that night, I spoke to my wife, and she's like, hold on a second. There's, you know, it's your story too, and there's a way to tell it that sort of works for everybody. So I went and talked to my brother, who lives out of Texas, and I called him on the phone, and I got him on board with it. Then I went and spoke to my mother, who's the focal point of this book, and you know, and she was okay with it. You know, she was a little nervous about some of the parts, and so that's how this book became. So really, while Vicki gave all of my credits with the Howard Stern Show, this book is sort of written for, if you're a fan of the show, and you've known me because I've been on the show for 27 years, this will sort of explain to you who I am and how I came to be who I am. But what I've been finding is that if you're not a fan of the show, it doesn't really matter because this is actually a very interesting crowd for me to be talking to about this book because I'm talking to people around my age and how, you know, the relationship with your parents. I don't know, people around my age and the relationship with your mother. And then in the room are mothers who are sometimes who we talk about when you're not around and this is what happened. So, you know, the big story is that my mom suffered from mental illness. My mom was manic depressive, she suffered from depression, she was manic depressive, and not the kind that is like, oh, you know, take a couple pills. The kind where my mom was hospitalized twice. She had 2 nervous breakdowns, she had electroshock therapy, and then she got into that really interesting thing in the 60s where she would go to a lot of different doctors, but not tell any of them that she'd been to any of them. So my mom had this arsenal of medication, and she would go, well, he told me to take 2, so I'm going to take 4, because I feel really depressed today. But then he told me to take 3, and she was a self-medicator. It was all this lunacy. So in all of that, my dad, who was a World War II veteran, he was like the rock of the family. He was very normal. And early on, he did me probably the hugest favor that he ever did. He sat me down when I was like 6 years old. My mom went to the hospital for the first time, and he said to me, listen, I want to tell you what's going on with your mom. Your mom is sick. She's sick in the head, not the regular kind of sick that you would know about. But the important thing to know is you haven't done anything wrong. This is not about you. This is about mom. And that's one of the things that probably saved my life because, but I didn't realize that until I got you know, much older. So the first 5 or 6 chapters of the book deal with my relationship with my mom, but it also talks about the show. And then there's chapters in the book that are about the show that you probably, you know, if you don't listen to, you may not care about, but are funny. There's a chapter in here about my brother who died of AIDS, and I'm not going to read from that chapter because I cried when I wrote it, I cried when I proofread it, I cried when I read it again, and for good measure, I cried when I read it for the audiobook. So I'm sticking away from that one. But so really the bullet point, the headline, if somebody said, what's your book about? I would say, I grew up in a very chaotic household where I didn't know what was going to go on from day to day, and I had no idea that that would be very good training for producing a show. Because I would come home from school, and I would try to think, okay, if my mom's in this mood, I can do this, this, or this. If she's in this mood, I can do this, this, or this. If she's in this mood, I can do this, this, or this. Which is sort of like producing a show, trying to gauge the mood, especially the show that I work on is not scripted. And so you have to think on your feet all the time. And so I'm going to read a couple of very short passages out of the book that give you a flavor of what it's all about. My dad's name was Sal, my brother's name was Anthony, and that might come up in here. Now, you know, I've done a lot of shows. I did a Letterman show, I did the Today Show, I was on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. Jimmy Kimmel brought up a really good point. He said, okay, was your mom regular crazy or Italian crazy? and the joke is that there's 2 different things. There's mental illness, and there's just being sort of a crazy, protective Italian mother. So this passage I'm going to read to you now sort of goes to the second issue, the Italian part. My mom's issues stemmed as much from her temper as they did from her mental instability. There was a line she crossed where one gave way to the other, like she couldn't find an off switch. One day we went to the A&S department store in Hempstead to buy new school clothes. My mom tried to pay with a credit card that was in my father's name, but the sales lady wouldn't accept it. Naturally, my mom flew into a rage. She started throwing my clothes, which were sitting in a pile on the counter, at the lady. Those were followed by the black Chuck Taylor high tops I had picked out. One of the Chucks hit the sales lady in the head while she was on the phone with security. That's when we sprinted out of the store to avoid getting arrested. The temper problems meant that even when my mom was in the right, she could occasionally wind up in the wrong. In our part of town, she had a lot of friends, but she also had a lot of people she perceived to be her enemies. That's how it was with her. Everything was black and white. You were her friend, or you were her enemy. Our next-door neighbors happened to be enemies. The houses on my street were practically on top of one another, separated by just a thin driveway. The older son next door was just a grade ahead of me, and for some reason, he had it in for me. He constantly beat the crap out of me. It became a regular topic of conversation in my house. What are we going to do about Gary beating me? I was in the 3rd grade. Finally, one warm spring afternoon, my mom decided she was going to go next door and have a chat with the guy's mom. It was just like out of the Brady Bunch when Peter was getting picked on, and Mike and Carol went over to the bully's house, expecting everyone to be reasonable, except in my case, they weren't. With me on her heels, my mom walked over and knocked on her neighbor's door. I noticed a lot of kids playing ball in the street. I stopped by myself at the very edge of the property line on the driveway, which meant I was still plenty close to listen to the conversation. I'd never been in their house, and I was really anxious about even being as close as I was. Our neighbor opened her screen door, but instead of inviting my mom in, she stepped out onto the top step of the stoop. My mom said, "I want your son to leave my son alone." So far, so good. Perfectly reasonable request. Carol Brady would have been proud. Then our neighbor answered in a flippant, casual tone, "Maybe your son can defend himself." Uh-oh. I can't remember who dropped the first F-bomb, but in a matter of seconds we were flying. The neighbor was yelling, "Fuck you." My mom yelled it back, and then my mom pushed her. My first thought was, let's get out of here, Mom. This isn't working. We should walk away right now. I knew that my mom would get herself worked up, and it would be impossible to stop this thing from escalating. There would be no turning back. Our neighbor couldn't believe she'd been pushed. She stood there, her mouth open, like she was watching a scary movie, only she was in it. Now people were starting to gather around. The kids who'd been playing ball in the street dropped their bats and stared. Then my mom took it to another level. There were shrubs and a flower bed just to the side of our neighbor's stoop, underneath the big bay window. As the woman stood there, my mom reached down and pulled up some shrubs. She must have caught a glimpse of the roots because she decided they might make a good weapon. Then she started bashing our neighbor with the shrubs. Dirt was flying everywhere. By now, the neighborhood parents were in the street watching too. They were fascinated, amazed, horrified, and stunned. I was petrified and embarrassed. This is not what we came here to do, I thought. My mom had started out in the right, and now she was beating our neighbor with her shrubbery. And so, you know,